chapters and some page numbers that are on your handouts. You have two handouts today. One is a main outline of the talk today. The other is an additional handout of some information, some background information that we'll look at here in just a moment. And my hope is that what we do today will either give you a foundation for future study of Revelation or will encourage you in your ongoing study of the book. And I thought it'd be appropriate just to begin with a reading from Revelation chapter 5, verses 9 through 14. And will allow us to kind of set the tone for our time together today. Jeff, you said we had till 8 tonight, is that right?
It'll just be you and me, though.
We might need it. What'd you say?
It'll just be you and me.
Yeah. So it's a vision of God's people in heaven worshiping around God's throne before God and Christ, the Lamb. And they sang a new song saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe, language, and people and nation. You've made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." And the four living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshipped. We don't want to miss out that Revelation ultimately is a book about worship. It should inspire our worship. It should move us to worship. Now, as we begin today, I want to just begin with a couple basic principles that really have to do with our spirit and our attitude. And the first principle is simply to be humble. To be humble. It's wise to study the Bible and certainly a book like Revelation with humility. And here's just the truth. Thoughtful, godly Christians understand and they interpret the book differently. That's certainly been my experience over the years teaching the book. The teachers that have taught me Revelation, the different authors that have shaped my thinking about Revelation, they don't all see it the same way. There's some difference of opinion, and so that's okay. So one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that there really are no Revelation experts, and I am certainly not an expert. I'm an interested student of Revelation. I spent a lot of time over the years studying it, and had some good teachers. But I'm a minister. That's my first calling, and a student of Revelation is a second calling. So I'm okay to say I'm not quite sure how to answer that, or let me get back with you. And if there are really hard questions, just see Jeff about them. That would be probably the best thing. So there are no problem-free interpretations, and that's okay. Revelation defies easy interpretation. And it's important to remember that we're not commanded to agree on everything about Revelation, but we are commanded to love one another. And I like to just start with that. And that's my own thinking about the book as well. And here's the second principle, and that's to keep an open heart and mind. Keep an open heart and mind. In my experience, people bring baggage to Revelation. They bring stuff to Revelation. I think we could call it pre-understandings, what we believe about the book. We might think of our expectations that we have about what the book is about, what it means. If you have them, some people have never cracked it open before. In some ways, those are the easiest people to teach, to be honest. So pre-understandings are previously formed beliefs and attitudes, impressions, understanding about Revelation. Some of them may be good, some of them may not be helpful. Let's just take a few moments and around your tables, around your tables, let's discuss this question. What has been your experience with Revelation? What are your impressions, both positive and negative? What's been your experience with Revelation? What are your impressions, both positive and negative? Just take a moment around your tables. And if you don't know each other, make sure you maybe share your names first and then discuss that question, those two questions. Okay?
Terry does have one.
So for me, there's sort of two parts to Revelation. The first few chapters really writing to the specific churches seems pretty straightforward.
And then there's just the other 18 chapters.
Right, exactly.
Well, what confuses me, well, I mean, I understand what he did was right in terms of what I've seen is we 20th century people try to make it fit today or the history of this world, and it doesn't. And that's the confusing part is when you talk to these scholars or whatever they are, and they're talking and you hear them speak and they say, well, this was not Rome, and this was like, no, it wasn't. It was Rome. And that's what he was talking about was the rise, the terror of Rome, and the fall of Rome. I think people build too much into Revelations as to an historical document. It talks about Rome, but it's not prophesizing about Nazis, Russia. It doesn't do that, in my mind. And I think people build a lot into it. He points out in the book that people, you've got to look at the context of when this was written, for whom it was written. Like you said, the seven churches, and all Christians really that live in the world.
Why don't we come back together? One of the challenges is we'll be limited in some ways with. We could talk about these things a long time, and it's interesting to do. That's a fun way to teach it. So we'll definitely have some discussion times. But I'm just curious, just a few people that want to, maybe a few themes you heard around your table, impressions of Revelation, experiences, anything come up around your table that seemed relevant and important?
Someone made a comment that we try to fit ourselves into Revelation.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult to do because of what it specifically does.
Yeah. How is Revelation relevant for us, and how do we fit in this story? I hope we can kind of speak to that today, but yeah, it feels very different than, let's say, Ephesians does. That feels a lot closer to home. Yeah, right. Any other kind of general comments?
I think a theme that came up for us multiple times was avoidance because of it being intimidating or scary.
Yes, yeah, and that's to me is the most common, and I'll say that here in a second. But avoiding it, it's scary, it's frightening. I have to confess, one of the people on my mind as I wrote this book was my mother, because that was her opinion about Revelation. So she feels like I've taken a little of the fear away from it, which is really meaningful to me personally. So that's a very common reaction. Yeah. Other comments? Well, let's just keep that in mind as we move forward. So like a stew, our pre-understandings of Revelation are composed of a lot of experiences and influences. And, sometimes the things that we bring to Revelation, the baggage, if you let me use that metaphor, can kind of undermine the study. And so In the book, I talk about unhealthy attitudes and misguided approaches. For example, as we've been talking about, some people will avoid the book at all costs. They don't want anything to do with it. No one can understand it anyway, so why bother with it? And those are really kind of the people that I have in mind for the study. And I know some, honestly, who are too confident in their interpretation, believing Revelation to be a literal play-by-play blueprint of the future. And consequently, you read Revelation side by side with headlines from today, and you're watching for things like the rapture or the Antichrist or tribulation or earthly millennium. And I'm going to just suggest that neither of those extreme approaches are helpful. That this baggage can really kind of undermine and impair our study and our ability to discover Revelation's timeless message for today. So I guess the point is keep an open mind and as much as possible approach the book with a blank slate. And as we approach the book, we discover that Revelation is not like any other book in the Bible. Surprise, right? 4 horsemen bringing chaos to the earth, demon locusts from hell, a pregnant woman crowned with the stars, a monster rising from the sea. Revelation doesn't exactly make for a good vacation Bible school theme. You know what I mean? And we can just say it, Revelation is weird. It's weird. What did John eat the night before? And if we don't understand how to interpret the imagery, then yes, Revelation can be scary. And it's not like any other book in the Bible. Maybe the book of Daniel is the closest thing. Maybe Ezekiel has some weird things as well. But there's another sense in which Revelation is like every other book in the Bible. Anybody have a thought about what I might mean by that? It's like every other book in the Bible.
It's inspired.
That's true. It's inspired. What else?
God wins in the end.
God wins. Now you spoiled the ending, don't you? You guys can leave. I was going to save it for the end, What else?
It's been given for the edification of the saints.
That's right. And that's a big clue. It's for us. It's for a blessing. And so there has to be something there for us, Very good. Here's another way to think about it. Revelation contains a message from God, from Christ, given to a human author who in turn shares it with a first century audience for a real purpose. And Revelation shares that in common with the other 65 books of the Bible. And so, like the other books of the Bible, the key to making sense of Revelation is learning something about its author, its first century author, its human author, about its first century audience, about the challenges that they were facing. We need to learn something about the historical and the cultural backgrounds. We need to learn something about literary style. In other words, how does the book communicate? We need to learn something about how it's structured. In other words, the internal outline, how these various parts relate to the whole. And so this is what I mean by Revelation simplified. Revelation simplified. We simplify Revelation, we make it understandable by approaching it and studying it like we would Romans or 1 Peter or any other biblical book. And we could call this a common sense approach to Revelation. So here's how I'd like to organize our study today. And we're going to do brief introductions of each of these themes. The historical and the cultural setting of Revelation. We're going to look just very briefly at 3 historical windows that shed light on the first century setting of Revelation. The literary style or the genre of Revelation. Revelation is a complex document. It's a letter, it's prophecy, and it's apocalypse. And so to interpret Revelation correctly or responsibly, we need to take each of these sub-genres, these sub-literary styles seriously. The symbols of Revelation. As an apocalypse, Revelation uses symbols to communicate its message. The literary structure of Revelation, so the internal outline and themes. Revelation's internal organization is surprising but convicting. And as we're going to see, Revelation seems to take us to the end of the world not once but multiple times. And we have to ask the question, why is that? Now, I have an asterisk by that it's really hard to gauge the time today, and so if we have to cut something, I'll probably cut that. But we'll see when we get to that point. And then the significance of Revelation. The significance of Revelation. And we're going to look at 7. Again, time allowing, we'll look at 7 applications about how this book speaks to our lives today. Okay, so that's kind of the basic plan. Does that sound okay to everybody? All right, let's start with the historical and cultural setting of Revelation. Jeff, in a minute, can you summarize everything you talked about the last Saturday session? But that was your theme recently, correct?
Yeah. Background of the early church, right? So fix everything I said wrong.
Okay. I don't know if I have the time to do that, Jeff. But I was intrigued by it. That was your theme last time. Who was here at that last one? I'm just kind of curious to see. Okay, good. Quite a few. So that's helpful.
But we don't listen to what he says.
Right.
So you can tell us
you just feel bad for him, right?
Gary speaks for himself, by the way.
Okay. That's really helpful that you did that, because we won't spend lots of time on it today, but that gives you a nice, good foundation. Just thinking about the backgrounds of the Bible and so forth. Just as a general question, in our study of the Bible, why is it important to know something about the historical and cultural context of the first century? Why might that be something, of the New Testament world? Why do we need to do something about history and culture then? What do you think?
The Bible, at least these portions, the New Testament, wasn't written to us. It was written to those first century persons or second century persons that would come to read it. And we look at it as it's written for us today, but it wasn't written to us. So to understand what it means, we need to have some historical context of people and the times.
Really well said. What you said there, it wasn't written to us, but it is for us. We're a part of it as well. That's a great way to put it. Well said. Any other comments about that?
Stole that.
Yeah, did you? Yeah. I didn't need to know that. I was impressed.
I didn't need to know that.
Any other comments?
I mean, if anybody reviewed something written in the 21st century, 300 years from now, or whenever, it might be hard to figure out what they were talking about if they didn't know the context that it was written in.
That's right. So that's another way to kind of frame that question. Let's say, historians are talking about 2025, 2,000 years from now. What might they need to know to understand us as who we are? They're going to need to know something about politics and values and the economy and religion and technology, just what's going on in the world, that sort of thing. And that's true for Revelation as well. The writing of Revelation, it has a historical context. And the better we understand that context, the better we can understand how Revelation speaks to our world today. Sometimes I'll put it this way. The most important context for understanding Revelation is the first century context. And so there's a few things that tend to lead to things that get ignored in a lot of modern understandings of Revelation. It can kind of lead to confusion and distortion, and this is a big one. So the starting point for a good study of Revelation. Revelation was written by a man named John to 7 historical churches in ancient Asia Minor, Roman Asia, modern-day Turkey, toward the end of the first century. So it's written by a man named John to 7 historical churches in the area of Asia Minor, part of the Roman Empire, at the end of the first century. And so we need to ask, what was life like for these Christians? What was life like for people in the churches that John writes to? What challenges were they facing? Why did they need the message of Revelation? And we're going to find out the reason they need the message of Revelation is not all that different from why we need the message as well. And so we have 2 historical sources of information that help us answer these questions. We have secular historical resources or external resources. So we have Roman historical sources. We also have a Jewish historian, Josephus. You talked about Josephus at your last one, didn't you? We won't talk about him today. But we have some outside sources of the Bible that shed light on the Bible, the background. And then we have internal clues in Revelation itself as a second source that helps us understand what was going on. And so we'll look at both of those. And so for this part of the discussion, chapter 7 in the book is Know Your History, and that's what we'll just summarize at this point. So three historical windows, which are really three Roman emperors that help us make some sense of what's going on in Revelation. And this is a big topic. I was telling Jeff last night, I study the Roman Empire, I realize how little I know about it. So this is a vast topic. But looking at these three emperors in particular, I think give us some insight into what was going on in the world of Revelation. So the first one is Emperor Nero. Window number one is Nero's persecution of Christians. Do we know anything about Nero? Jeff, did you talk about Nero last night? I thought you did.
So good test for them, see if they
yeah.
paying attention.
Let's see. Very clear this here. Anybody remember anything about Nero or know something about Nero?
I don't think he said it at all.
You don't think I said it enough? I don't think you were listening.
He started, allegedly, historians feel that he started the fire to kind of burn down an area of Rome so he could build things, temples and things to himself. And when everything went south, his popularity waned. He blamed the Jews, or not the Jews, the Christians. And so that began a persecution.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah. They did listen, Jeff. Look at
I read your book too.
Oh, did you? Okay.
That's why you got it.
Well,
Okay. So, but you hit on some things. So Nero, he's an interesting character, very colorful. My understanding is he would have rather been in theater than a Roman emperor. He was really interested in the arts and things like that. All of these guys have really big egos, and he was one. But like toward the end of his reign, he starts a fire which burns up a large part of major center in Rome, and he blames Christians for it. This is in AD 64. And then we have the Roman historian Tacitus, about 50 years later, looking back and describing what Nero did and just the torture of Christians and persecuting Christians, torturing Christians for his amusement. And so for our purposes, he's the first Roman emperor to persecute Christians. That's what's important to understand. It was brief, it was local, but what Nero does is he establishes a precedent that Christians are different and may need to be persecuted to contain them or something like that. So from page 67, make this comment. Though his violent death took place 25 years before the book's writing, allegedly by suicide, Nero's cruelty toward Christians haunts Revelation's visionary world and shapes John's portrayal of the beastly nature of Roman power. So as John thinks about Rome in the book of Revelation, Nero is on his mind. And, kind of Nero is representative of the worst of the Roman state and how they maintain, peace and order, and how Christians were often viewed as different, worthy of maltreatment. But even though most likely Revelation is written a generation after Nero shapes John's thinking about Rome. I guess that's my main point. So we'll come back to that. So the second window is Emperor Domitian and the imperial cult. Domitian and the imperial cult. Domitian was the emperor from 81 to 96, and he's the likely emperor of Rome when the book of Revelation is written, and he's believed to be the second emperor that persecuted Christians. He's believed to be the second emperor that persecuted Christians. There's a little bit of debate about that, but there does seem to be evidence for it. So a couple of key things that are important for us to understand, just with our little background survey. a Roman by the name of Suetonius. There were others as well. That he talks about Domitian desiring to be called Lord and God. And that increased as his reign went on. That he maybe even demanded it toward the end of his reign. He demanded to be called Lord and God. Roman citizens were familiar with revering the emperors as gods. And it was not something that typically was imposed, that citizens weren't forced to do it. They weren't forced to do it, certainly in Rome. And in the outer provinces of the Roman Empire, they weren't necessarily forced to do it, but it was something that was offered as a gesture of support to Rome and to the emperor. We'll talk a minute about the Roman imperial cult, but basically the civic religion of the day, not so much a religion, almost like a political arrangement where the citizens would give their loyalty to the emperor, demonstrate that loyalty through rituals and through support, and then the emperor would provide protection and order and support the economy, and especially the provinces that were farther away from Rome. It was very important for them to have the support of the emperor for their protection. And so that's where scholars will tell us that the imperial cult really thrived in Asia Minor. That's where the churches are that John writes in Revelation. And there is some suspicion that during Domitian's time there might have been a change where supporting the emperor through his cult, through this worship, wasn't something that was just being offered, but it was something that was being demanded. And there are some Roman inscriptions, monuments, paintings that portray worship of the emperor in the imperial cult. There's some examples there. Scholars tell us that the earliest and the most influential temples built in honor of living emperors are in the cities of Pergamum, Smyrna, and Philadelphia. In Pergamum, Smyrna, and Ephesus. And so these are three cities that John writes to in the book of Revelation. The imperial cult, major shrines there to the emperor. It's thriving in those settings. In fact, scholars will tell us that during Domitian's reign, a massive temple in Ephesus is built in his honor. And there's a statue, and there's a little debate, but most likely it's a statue of Domitian and not his brother Titus. It's built in Ephesus. It's with a shrine, so there's an image of the shrine, and there's an image of this statue. And I like that picture because you see a person there, you kind of get a sense of scale. Over 20 feet high at this shrine in Ephesus. And so many Revelation scholars look at that and they think that shrine with that large statue to Domitian may be what's on John's mind when he writes Revelation 13 and this portrayal of the beast from the sea. The Roman emperor arriving in the seaport of Ephesus, you've got this giant statue, this monument in his honor. That may be the background. Let me read just a quick quote from the book, page 70, kind of a little bit of this background. And I want you to think, what would this social arrangement have meant for these Christians, for these churches? What would life like be for them? Think about that here. What kind of questions does it raise? This is from page 70. Since Julius Caesar, who died in 44 BC, good emperors were added to Rome's inventory of gods upon their deaths and were worshipped alongside the conventional Greco-Roman deities. The cult worship of the emperor took many forms, including erecting temples and statues in his honor, offering sacrifices during parades or festivals, commemorating his birthday or military victories, and participating in banquets celebrating his divine benevolence. These manifestations of civic religion brought unity and stability to a vast and diverse empire. Through the state religion, citizens expressed loyalty and gratitude to the emperor for his divine protection and blessings, while Caesar was flattered and compelled to continue to provide peace and security to the citizenry. So if you're a Christian in that context, what would that be like for you? What do you think? What kind of things does that present you with? Challenges? What do you think?
You really have to be outside of the mainstream of society.
Yeah, that's right. You don't fit in that situation. least you should.
Yeah.
And that rate, that's part of the issue. In these 7 churches, they're wrestling with, okay, how do we fit into this arrangement? And some aren't going to do it at all, but some are kind of blurring the lines a little bit. I would argue that's the context right there. Anything else come to mind? So some like questions that might be raised. This is from 71. Really, and that's true for us today too. How much of culture can you be a part of? How much of a secular society? We don't quite fit in today either, do we? So it's not. This is where it's not really all that hard different. Some things are different, but really not. The challenge really isn't different. Could they publicly go through the motions of emperor worship while privately worshiping the living God? That's a tough one. Could they engage in civic religion, knowing that participation expressed political patriotism more than religious piety? Could they burn incense on Domitian's altar if it safeguarded them from persecution and enabling them to earn a living? In short, could a true Christ follower confess Caesar as Lord and God? And that's a big no, according to Revelation. So just kind of imagine yourself in those situations. Maybe you're at a banquet where they're offering a sacrifice to Roman gods and to the emperor. Or to a lot of time, in all of these situations at these shrines, it's to the emperor, but then it's also to the goddess who represents Rome, Roma. So Rome was personified as a goddess, and we'll see that a little bit later. Can you be a part of that banquet? Can you be around that sacrifice? Can you be at a parade where you might be expected to offer a prayer at an altar, something like that? We face similar challenges today, but in some ways it's different as well. So these are some of the things that they're wrestling with. A quote from page 71. For Christians to refuse participation in the popular civic religion would have been viewed by family members and neighbors as disloyal, ungrateful, atheistic, and unpatriotic. Those are some of the accusations of Christians in the first century. Did you talk about some of those last time, Jeff? Some of those, the idea that from a Roman perspective, Christians that abstained from worship of the Roman gods and the Roman emperor were viewed as atheists. That's kind of the origin of the word, which is interesting. So the third window then is Emperor Trajan. Emperor Trajan. Emperor Trajan's correspondence with Governor Pliny. And the two teachers that have influenced my thinking the most about Revelation both felt like this was essential to a grasp of the context of Revelation, historical context. So I gave you a copy of that. It's a page or two from the book. And if it's okay with you, I might just read that with you real quick. And then if history isn't your thing, we're going to move on, so it'll be okay. But this kind of sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about. But this is a historical window, the Pliny-Trajan correspondence. And this is readily accessible on the internet if you're wanting to. And there's good videos out there about it as well. So let me just read this because it's pretty insightful. In AD 112, a provincial governor of Asia Minor named Pliny wrote to Emperor Trajan asking his advice concerning the prosecution of Christians. This famous exchange contains the first recorded mention of Christians in Roman imperial records. Pliny begins his matter-of-fact letter by acknowledging he had no experience in the prosecution of Christians, an admission which suggests that in other areas of the empire, believers who were being arrested and punished simply for confessing Jesus as Lord. So this is happening in other places. Pliny explains to Trajan his makeshift prosecutorial procedure. So he's just kind of making it up as he goes. This is a governor. He's now been confronted with some Christians. He doesn't know what to do. Meantime, this is him writing. Meantime, this is the course I have taken with those who were accused before me as Christians. I asked them whether they were Christians, and if they confessed, I asked them a second and third time with threats of punishment. If they kept at it, I ordered them for execution. As for those who said that they neither were nor ever had been Christians, I thought it right to let them go, since they recited a prayer to the gods at my dictation, made supplication with incense and wine to your statue, emperor worship, together with the images of gods, and moreover cursed Christ. things which, so it is said, those who are really Christians cannot be made to do. Others who were named by the informers said that they were Christians and then denied it, explaining that they had been, but had ceased to be such, some 3 years ago, some a good many years, and a few even 20. All these both worship your statue and the images of the gods and cursed Christ. So that's Pliny's correspondent. There's a lot more to it. I'm just giving you a little tiny bit of it. In this notorious passage, Pliny chillingly describes his twofold legal policy toward Christians. First, if they stubbornly refused to renounce Jesus, he had them executed. Second, if Christians willingly offered prayers to the Roman gods and sacrificed incense and wine in devotion to Trajan, while cursing the name of Christ, he released them. In his infamous reply, Emperor Trajan formally endorsed Pliny's judicial action. So this is Trajan's response. You have adopted the proper course in your examination of the cases of those who were accused to you as Christians. For indeed, nothing can be laid down as a general ruling involving something like a set form of procedure. They are not to be sought out, but if they are accused and convicted, they must be punished. Yet on this condition that whoever denies being a Christian and makes the fact plain by his action, that is, by worshiping our gods, shall obtain pardon on his repentance. So Pliny and Trajan's legal policy toward Christians serves an important historical window for the study of Revelation for two primary reasons. First, Pliny's specific reference to Christians denying the name of Jesus some 20 years before, I say confirms, if I could write that again, I might say strongly suggests that the church in Asia Minor was being pressured and persecuted for their loyalty to Jesus during the reign of Domitian and at the time of the writing of Revelation. So it suggests that this kind of thing's been going on for a while. Second, Trajan's policy dramatically illustrates the consequential choice the early church faced. Go along with society by worshiping Rome's emperor and gods and lose your soul in the process, or worship Jesus alone and prepare to lose your community standing, source of income, and potentially even your life. The apocalypse was written to Christians facing this eternal choice. So, if I was going to summarize what we've talked about with the historical background, I do it this way. Nero's persecution exposes the true beastly nature, the true violent nature of the Roman state. You've probably heard of the idea of the Roman peace. That Roman peace was built upon violence from a biblical perspective. Christians were different. They had different values and loyalties and commitments, and this invited social marginalization, even persecution. Domitian's desire to be called Lord and God and encouragement of the imperial cult may have been what prompted the writing of Revelation. And Trajan, for Christians living in Asia Minor at the end of the first century, following Jesus was a matter of life and death. My teacher, Robert Lowry, put it this way, it's a very good quote. Politically, Christians were viewed as a danger to the unity of the empire by the refusal to worship the emperor as a god. Religiously, Christians repudiated the legitimacy of other religions. Socially, Christians rejected the pagan way of life. And by their very lifestyles, Christians opened themselves to attack. Rejection and oppression were unavoidable. Okay, that's a little bit of history. What time are we wanting to take a break, Jeff? Did you say?
On 9:45.
Okay. Let me pause for a second. Any comments or questions? And I'm certainly available anytime this morning to chat about anything, but if anybody want to raise a question or make a comment?
What came to mind while you were talking, the big thing that's different with our culture, it's possible for us to not be part of our culture. Like, we can go to our homes and like be a lot more independent than they were. You know, they lived closer together in cities. They depended on each other for everything.
Yes.
You know, their families lived together.
Yes, different time and place for sure. That's right. Some good dynamics. Yes. Yes.
I think too about it's so striking, Christians are given the choice, renounce Jesus or die, and it's just very black and white in that setting.
Right.
Whereas now, and it may have been the case then too, but it feels really possible to be Christian-ish and to be,
It's a great way to
faithful
put it.
in certain things and not in other things, to compromise without consequence, to be just not as black and white in so many circumstances. And that's what we see in Revelations. Jesus, calling out these churches for their compromise, for their love of the world, which, I know we'll get there as a call for us, but I think that's something, I almost wish I were in a situation where it was just so clear. It was obvious to me, this is evil and I reject it, whereas now it just, I don't know, like in some situations there's even political benefit for being a Christian. There's, so that's something I thought of.
It's a good comment, very good comment. And as we're going to see, or if you're familiar with the messages from Christ to the seven churches in chapters 2 and 3, they're doing some similar things. How can I be a Christian-ish? I like how you put that. So, yes, sir.
I thought it was very interesting in your book that you made a comment that the Romans didn't understand Christians because we worship a person that they had crucified.
Right.
And that was the real, not real issue. That was certainly a problem for the Romans to understand Christians who worship somebody that the Roman Empire had crucified. And why would you do that? I mean, obviously he wasn't a god because he didn't save himself. And I had never thought of it that way, and I thought that was very astute of you to bring that out. Or copy it from somebody else, whatever.
I appreciate that. I'm just learning from others about things like that. Doesn't Paul pick up on that in 1 Corinthians 1, the cross is foolishness to the world. What a dumb idea. Follow somebody that was...
But I think that's why the Romans hated him.
Yeah.
Rather than, like the Jews, they tolerated. Because even though the Jews didn't worship Nero or the Caesars, they were like, well, they're just strange people over there.
Yeah, and you're right. They were given some toleration over the years for different reasons.
Right.
Cooperation, things like that. There's some famous graffiti from I think the 2nd century where the person doing the graffiti is mocking Christians for worshiping like a donkey or something, a crucified criminal with a donkey body. It's designed to be very offensive, but it captures the offense of the worst criminals are the ones that are crucified.
Right.
So we could. That's a good comment because it does kind of it highlights how different. We're different today, but how different it was for them to begin to follow this crucified. Nobody had a category for that.
Yeah.
So, good insight.
Hey, Greg, Denise had a comment.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
What happened? Because before the death of Christ, the Romans didn't involve themselves too much in this stuff. So, what happened to make them? Is it really that ego-driven that they have to become gods themselves and start persecuting people who are Christians? Because they really stayed out of that. They stayed out of that.
Well, this might be
At least
different.
according to my history.
Yeah, there might be different ways to respond to that. Jeff, feel free to help me if you'd like to, or anybody. Something that really happens at the end of the 1st century is that Jews and Christians really begin to become separated. Jews push themselves away. In fact, John will talk about, in Revelation, talks about the synagogue of Satan persecuting Christians, probably their informants, saying these people are worshiping Christ as a god or something like that, giving their highest loyalty. So it's my understanding that by the end of the 1st century, Christians don't have the same cover that they used to have. From a Roman perspective, Christians were just another sect of Judaism, and who cares about that? Christians were good citizens. We're commanded to be good citizens in that context, but that does begin to change. And emperor worship goes back to Julius Caesar, which is about 40-some years before the time of Christ. So it was It was there. Maybe I'm not answering the question you're
That's
asking.
okay. I
Yeah.
mean, and this is my first time through this, so it's
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
me not understanding, so.
But,
that's fine.
but another thing, as I'm thinking in real time, but Christians, the church begins to grow and it begins to have influence. And as the church grows and is separated from the Jewish faith, they just become more noticeable. And honestly, they were less willing to go along with things maybe like Jews had been. And so they stand out and they become easy targets, really. Yeah, that's a good question. You got a thoughtful bunch here, Jeff. You got a good teacher over here too, though, don't you? Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes.
Was there more toleration in that 13 to 15 year gap between Nero and Domitian? Where I think wasn't the destruction of Jerusalem after Nero was dead?
It just after, 80,
Yeah,
70. Yes, sir.
70. So, but there was a period of time there, about 15 years, where I don't know.
Yeah, about 13 years between
Yeah.
Nero and Domitian. And the truth is, I don't think we have much, we don't have a lot of information about it. You know, we have very little information about Christians outside of the Bible in the first century. So, I think,
John was he was it's been thought that he was the last apostle standing. Right?
Mhm.
But,
yeah,
and yet we have Peter and Paul, historically, supposedly dying at the end of Nero's reign.
Right.
Right there.
yep. Probably during that same era, yes.
During the period of time, because Paul was in house arrest for quite a while before then he was, put to death. So,
Yeah.
so I was just curious about that 13-year period.
Yeah, I don't think we have much information about Christians during that period. In fact, I quote the Pliny Trajan. I mean, that's the first, it's my understanding, in Roman literature, it's the first reference to Christians. Now, Tacitus writes a few years later about an earlier period of time, but we just don't have a lot of information about it. We got a little bit in Josephus too, right, Jeff? He mentions Christians just a little bit.
Because if you compare the end of the writing of Paul and Peter in the 60s, there, 60s AD, and then you pick up in the 90s, you got those 7 churches of Asia, which some of them weren't even mentioned.
Right, which is
Before that, so they had to occur during that period of time, or at least flourish.
That's right. That's right. That's one of the reasons the thought is that it's at the end of the century, not during Nero's reign, we have Revelation. Is because it would take time for churches like that to develop that we don't have any record of. That's a good insight. Jeff, I'm wondering, it's 9:30? Maybe we go and take take 5 minutes, take a couple minutes, and then we got a natural break here. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll come back in,
All right.
10 minutes, okay.
Yeah, I would say just a few minutes and we can start.
Take a short break.
See your brother is so people.
Big ass.
He doesn't know that word.